Herzlich willkommen zu dieser neuen Episode von Maikes Raumzeit. Da meine Gesprächspartnerin englischsprachig ist, werde ich jetzt auch switchen und diesen Podcast auf Englisch führen. I'm Maike Tarabori and today I'm joined by Sasha Rubel, Head of Public Policy for Generative AI at AWS in EMEA and former UNESCO AI and Digital Innovation Lead. We'll talk today about why some organizations break out of Pilot-Purgatorium while others fall behind, what the EU AI Act really means for our AI roadmap, how agentic AI from re:Invent 2025 will reshape customer-facing operations, and what skills and mindsets you need now to stay competitive in a two-tier AI economy. I'm really happy you're here. Welcome, Sasha Rubel. Let's just jump in with the first question. It's a more personal question. You worked at the UNESCO, advised governments and international bodies, and now lead generative AI policy with AWS across EMEA. How has this journey shaped the way you think about the role of AI and which role it should play in society and economy?
So I spent more than 15 years in the public sector before I joined AWS. And one of the reasons why I joined AWS was the conviction that the private sector and industry have a really essential role to play in thinking through what the future of this technology looks like, but also how to translate principles of governance of responsible AI into practice. At AWS, we make a decision about making available a service or not that immediately impacts millions of lives around the world. And so when I joined AWS, I joined reflecting the DNA and the leadership principle of AWS, which is success and scale brings broad responsibility. I joined with the conviction that I wanted to be part of a team of people with different backgrounds, thinking through how can we leverage this technology in a safe and responsible way that will ultimately unlock the benefits of what this moment represents, because fundamentally it's not just a technological revolution, it's also a cultural one for people on the ground. I spent more than a decade working specifically on digital transformation and development issues, and I saw firsthand the urgency of putting the tools and the technology in the hands of people that are closest to the problem in order for them to solve those challenges, empower their communities, and change their lives. And the importance also of being able to convene people to share best practices about what works and what doesn't work and how to solve them.
Yeah.
The other aspect that I would underline in terms of that shift that you asked about is one of the things that I'm absolutely convinced of, both in my time in public service, but also in the private sector, is that we need to build bridges. That in order for this technology to unlock both the economic and social benefits that this moment represents, we need governments and innovators to be talking to each other. There is a lot of misunderstanding that exists right now with policymakers and industry counterparts, and industry of all sizes, not necessarily sharing a vocabulary around, for example, what responsible AI looks like in practice, what risk is, what are the technical solutions that we can develop using AI, for example, to address risks related to AI. And so I joined AWS also with the conviction that we need to build not only bridges between sectors, and that's government, private sector, industry, but also civil society and academia. But we also, in tandem to those bridges, we need to build a shared vocabulary about what responsibility is and how to operationalize it.
I think it's very interesting and an important factor that you said, that kind of share the language. We need to talk about the same thing, that they have the same understanding about actually where we want to go with it.
100%. It's interesting because one of the things that I found perhaps the most compelling as a takeaway in my years of work, I've worked in the AI field for almost 20 years, is that this challenge of a shared vocabulary is one of the biggest blockers to AI adoption. Because if you talk to policymakers and you say, do you think transparency, explainability, robustness, controllability, do you think these are important principles? Almost every single policymaker everywhere in the world will tell you, yes, these are important principles. But if you talk to an engineer and you say, can you please develop an algorithm that embeds by design transparency, explainability, accountability into the ways in which the algorithm is built, a lot of engineers will say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so a huge part of our work at AWS around responsible AI has been about translating theory and these principles like transparency, explainability, and the principles that guide our work in responsible AI into practice. Yeah. What do these principles mean for a designer or a developer or a deployer or a user of an AI system? So we've actually fleshed out guides really operationalizing these principles in response to the fact that right now around 85% of organizations see responsible AI as a top management issue, but in reality, less than 25% of organizations have governance programs in place to address it. So we need to address that gap so that we're moving from an approach of responsibility that's bolted on to built into by design. And part of that is this guide, but the other part of that is really education. Because fundamentally, AI literacy isn't just about understanding what AI technology is and isn't. It's also about understanding what it means to develop and deploy it responsibly. Because let's be honest, not everybody is going to be an AI coder, but everybody is going to, and I would say already does, interact with AI. Absolutely. So really, and it's one of the reasons why in our AI Ready commitment, we made available classes that are self-paced and available online for free that not only teach the technical aspects of what the technology is, but also aspects around, for example, questions of bias and fairness or other issues, because we see it as our responsibility to make sure that end users and innovators understand what it means to access this technology and to use it in a responsible way.
So you have on one hand, you have the language, the common understanding, you have the training, and then what you mentioned now, the access. You mentioned the democratized, oh God, now am I going to be able to say democratized access? Sorry.
No worries.
That's a really difficult one. Anyways, that could be one of the powerful forces for economy and social transformation within different regions. What does that mean, and what would it actually look like for you this? I'm going to let you say it.
Democratized access.
Democratized access. Thank you.
So, I mean, the high level one sentence phrase of what does democratized access mean? Mm-hmm. It means putting safely and responsibility this technology in the hands of people everywhere in a way that gives them confidentiality and control over their data. It gives them choice, and a lot of the announcements that we've made at reInvent you will have seen are dedicated to questions around customer choice, not just limited to questions of model choice, which is really in the DNA of our service bedrock, and also fundamentally control over costs. This is really the ways in which we think about democratized access, with the conviction that we need to make it easy for innovators everywhere, not only to access this technology, but to understand how to use it in a way that brings about both economic and social benefits. And I'll give you an example. There is a farmer in Italy named Matteo. Matteo is not an engineer. He's not a computer scientist. But using our AI systems, he founded a startup called X-Farm. X-Farm draws on his expertise as a farmer in Italy, and it is actually an AI-powered solution that allows farmers to mitigate pest control, to mitigate supply chain challenges and climate change mitigation, and to also make sure that they're planting their crops at the right time, given all of the environmental changes. This solution by Matteo has now been scaled to multiple countries in Europe and beyond. Yeah. I'll give you another example that I find really compelling, and is actually one of the examples that made me join AWS, which is a startup called Huron AI. Huron AI is a startup based out of Rwanda. It uses generative AI to provide personalized healthcare advice with human oversight of doctors to women suffering from breast cancer. Okay. In Rwanda, there are less than 15 oncologists specialized in breast cancer. That means that there is one doctor per 3,200 women in Rwanda suffering actively from breast cancer. Even if that doctor wanted to provide personalized care to 3,200 women per day, they cannot. Not only because there's not enough hours in the day, but also because a lot of these women are living in rural areas. They don't have the money to pay for the bus trip to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. And during the rainy season, a lot of these roads aren't even operational and they can't get to the capital. Yeah. And so fundamentally for us, what democratized access means is this easy access to tools in a safe and responsible way that not only unlocks the opportunity that this technology represents, but advances equity and inclusion in the ways in which this technology can be deployed to empower the lives of people around the world.
You mentioned as well before in other interviews the two-tier AI economy. How does that go together? Actually wanting to democratize the access and actually having then within the companies the reality of like being stuck in Pilot-Purgatorium or actually not making it out of the pilot phase with AI. How does that go together?
I love that you refer to the POC purgatory because this is something that comes up a lot in conversations. So we published a report that we commissioned called Unlocking Europe's AI Potential that identifies what you just articulated as the two-tier economy. And that two-tier economy manifests itself on three different levels. One is that startups are adopting AI at a much faster pace than larger enterprises. Larger enterprises, oftentimes for multiple reasons, are stuck in kind of the POC purgatory or at the productivity and efficiency gain stage of let's integrate an AI for an internal chatbot. Whereas startups are moving from productivity and efficiency gains to fundamentally more thinking around strategic transformation and more fundamentally even operational transformation. How can we actually use this technology to completely reimagine the ways in which we deliver value and address challenges, whether that be business challenges or some of the world's biggest problems like climate change? And so really empowering larger enterprises to move from that productivity and efficiency gain stage, that's one of the gaps that needs to be closed. The other kind of level of that two-tier economy that exists is the gap that exists between the rate at which the private sector adopts AI versus the public sector. Yeah. And this matters for several reasons. Private sector obviously is racing ahead in terms of AI adoption, but public sector AI adoption is absolutely crucial because A, it inspires trust, which is one of the blockers to AI. So actually public sector acceleration of AI adoption inspires the private sector to adopt even quicker and more equitably. But in tandem to that, it also inspires trust from citizens. And I'll give you an example. My 96-year-old father was convinced of two things until he died. One is that he would support the Irish rugby team no matter what, even though my mother was French. And the second thing that he was absolutely convinced of is that he did not understand technology. When I showed him email, he asked me, why he didn't need to go to the post office. When I showed him a video streaming of a concert, he asked if we had to pay for tickets. But my 96-year-old father at the end of his life was using a generative AI chatbot made available by the French government to access his Social Security benefits. If you had put my father in front of the website of the French Social Security branch, he would have been completely lost and just given up. Yeah. And so it's really actually allowing the government to deliver on its fundamental mission, which is being closer to their citizens. And so this is something that I find really exciting in terms of recent shifts in Europe and beyond, is a lot of governments, including Germany, are really focused on looking at how can we put in place pro-innovation strategies that accelerate public sector AI adoption. One of the blockers there is, again, lack of trust in the technology. And I'll share another anecdote and story that I think is emblematic of this. I talked to the chief data officer of a very large government who is an incredible woman, and in a way that was absolutely astounding, accelerated AI adoption inside of her public sector organization. And I sat down with her and I said, how did you do that? And how did you do that so quickly? And she said, Sasha, it's really simple. I sat down with 3,000 employees in this organization and I asked them what they hated the most about their jobs. And then I used AI to map what they hated the most about their jobs and I automated it. And so what fundamentally happened in this large government organization is public sector servants who join public service because they are mission-driven and they want to deliver value for their country no longer had to spend their time filling in horrible paperwork. Nobody likes paperwork. They didn't have to focus on filling in the paperwork anymore. They could instead focus on delivering value for citizens and being creative and being innovative and talking to citizens and figuring out, problems that could be addressed with this technology because their brains were no longer loaded down by filling in administrative bureaucracy. And so this represents, again, an enormous opportunity for governments to rethink the question is, how are we not going to be replaced by AI, but how are we going to be augmented by AI to allow us to return to what makes us the most fundamentally human, which is connecting with others and solving big problems. And so that gap needs to be addressed, and there's a huge shift in attention to accelerating public sector adoption. And then lastly, in terms of the two-tier economy, there's really a gap between tech-native companies that are adopting AI at a much faster pace than non-tech-native companies. This is obvious and no surprise. Yeah. But it matters for several reasons. It matters because, particularly in countries like Germany, the backbone of the European economy are traditional industries. They are agriculture. They are manufacturing. They are, cars. And so really focusing on how can AI actually help us rethink the ways in which non-tech native industries can, for example, deploy predictive maintenance in their factories or think through, which is one of the biggest costs in a lot of traditional industries, including in Germany. And so really closing that gap for us is absolutely central. There are a couple of blockers that exist that need to be addressed. One is regulatory uncertainty, which I'm happy to deep dive on. Another is the question of skills. And then lastly, question of investment. So we really need to close that gap because right now AI innovation is like a straight line up and AI adoption is a little bit more of a curve. And we need to close that gap, and that gap can be closed through pro-innovation policies.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you say the public sector should kind of boost maybe the general adoption of AI, that this is really a way because you're using it, you're seeing the benefits. But yes, let's dive into that uncertainty that you mentioned regarding all the regulations as well. You have the EU AI Act. There are certain companies are not really aware of how to deal with it and kind of where they're standing. So what is for you then, in your point of view, the most misunderstood maybe about the regulations right now, or the way of nevertheless being innovative?
Great question. So one of the top things that I hear from customers right now is that they don't understand their obligations under the EU AI Act. So in this report that we commissioned, we actually found that around 68% of organizations don't understand their compliance obligations under the EU AI Act. I had a conversation with a customer at reInvent yesterday where they highlighted that sometimes they feel that navigating regulation is like navigating pieces of a puzzle that are constantly moving and that you don't know where they're going to land. And Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta talked a lot about this in their respective reports and the need to simplify regulation. Right now, in tandem to the 68% of organizations that don't understand their obligations, because of the regulatory uncertainty, they would invest up to 28% less in AI year on year. That is an enormous budget that is not going to beneficial innovation because of regulatory uncertainty. But perhaps the most kind of compelling statistic from the report that we commissioned is that we found that 40% of overall IT spend, and in certain countries in the EU, this goes up to 46%, is spent on compliance-related costs. It's spent on understanding the interplay between the EU AI Act, the GDPR, the EU Copyright Directive. And let's be honest, if you're a startup in Europe and you have a little bit of funding, you're going to have a CEO, you're going to definitely have a CTO. You probably don't have armies of public policy professionals or legal professionals that are helping you navigate what is already complicated legislation, including for people who are specialized in this field. Yeah. And so it creates a lot of confusion that actually stalls innovation because the rules aren't clear. In Germany, you can drive really quickly on the Autobahn because the rules are clear. Yeah. There are not more accidents on the German Autobahn than there are on other highways in Europe. But Germany has made rules that are clear, and that allow people to preserve their safety and to go fast.
Yeah.
And so for us, one of our key kind of messages that we're relaying, that we hear from customers to policymakers, is the need to simplify regulations and the rules, not only to help customers adopt and innovate with AI, but also to help them scale. Because again, German champions in the AI space, and there are many, they don't want to be just German champions. They want to be, and they even don't want to be just European champions. They want to be global champions. And they are right to have that aspiration. Yeah. And in order for them to be global champions, we need the rules to be clear, but we also need them to be harmonized across the EU 27. And we need alignment at an international level through things like international standards that allow German champions to wake up and say, we would like to go to the UK, or we would like to go to Brazil or Canada or other jurisdictions, and where the rules are clear and shared. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, the definitions and vocabulary are aligned so that individuals understand that they can scale in a responsible, safe, and secure way across these borders. And regulatory certainty is really one of the key levers to unlock long-term European competitiveness. And I think there's a growing awareness in Europe and a shift in conversations, and I feel it in Brussels and beyond, from focusing just on the misuse of the technology towards focusing also on the misuse of this technology. What does it mean if we miss out on this moment? What does it mean in terms of GDP? But also, what does it mean in terms of improvement of individuals' lives through economic empowerment, and more broadly, the social benefits that this technology represents?
How do you explain then to the leaders, the business leaders or in governance, governments, that responsibility and innovation are not opposites, they're actually reinforcing each other? How do you kind of, bridge that gap?
I love that question, because one of the things that I'm seeing right now is there is a fake debate occurring that posits responsibility on one side and innovation on the other, and that posits these two things as opposites. In reality, responsibility and innovation need to go hand in hand, because responsibility builds trust, which is one of the key blockers to AI adoption. That trust drives adoption, which ultimately drives innovation that benefits everybody. So seeing responsibility and innovation going hand in hand is absolutely essential. It's why at AWS, our services are responsible and sovereign by design, because we understand that this is not only the right thing to do, it's also a business imperative. The return on investment of approaches that are responsible by design actually almost double the profit margins on innovation. And in the long run, individuals consume technology that they can trust. And so this question of starting with trust, not as an afterthought, but as an approach by design and responsibility that's not bolted on or built in, but that's really by design, is really in the DNA and in the ways in which we develop not only our AI services, but also our cloud services more broadly. I think part of that fundamentally is about investing in education. And I talked about the classes that we have available and digital literacy. But when I say education, I also mean policymaker education. How do we make sure that those that have a really hard job right now, which is thinking through how we govern a technology that outpaces any regulatory process that exists, and helping them think through how do we develop this shared vocabulary, bringing together innovators, scientists, technical experts to say, how can we mitigate risks, but also, and what keeps me up at night and wakes me up in the morning because I'm so excited about it, how do we look at how we can actually use AI to mitigate some of the risks related to AI so that in this democratized access, we make sure that it continues to be safe and responsible.
If we shift this, I love it that you bring up the skills and the training, that if we shift now to that, you argue that digital skills will be so more important than the traditional university degree, maybe. For leaders running now marketing, sales, service teams, and all that different departments, what would you say, what specific skills should they prioritize building in their team, within their team, or look out for? If we continue now on the employee side.
Great. Again, excellent question. We published research that found, as you evoked, that digital skills will be more important than your university degree. But in tandem to that, I would add two other kind of key considerations. One is that within 5 years, almost 50% of jobs will require digital literacy or some kind of AI competency. In tandem to that, those that have AI literacy skills can see an increase in their salary by up to 42%. So we need to make sure that people are benefiting from that. It is an unbelievable opportunity for economic empowerment, including from marginalized groups, most notably underrepresented groups in the tech sector, like women, to make sure that they are benefiting from what this opportunity represents. One of the things that I'm constantly underlining in the ways in which we think about the future of work is that digital literacy will be absolutely essential. But in tandem to that, there are other skills that are soft skills that will be just as essential. Those include critical thinking. They include creativity. They include compassion and emotional intelligence. They include cross-sectoral systems thinking, where we can bring different disciplines together to think through how technology can enable us to address some of these big challenges. So all of these, what I would call almost soft skills, will actually be just as important, alongside what I would say is the number one skill that will be required for the jobs that don't even exist yet today, but will tomorrow, thanks to the advent of AI, which is the question of curiosity. How do we cultivate a culture of curiosity and of courage where we are taking risks in a calculated way to explore how we can use this technology in a safe way to address some of the world's biggest challenges? And so how do we teach creativity and critical thinking and also use this opportunity, going back to what I was talking about earlier, to understand that this isn't just a technological revolution. This is a cultural one. How do we develop a kind of AI mindset that privileges and places an emphasis and value on these aspects of curiosity, critical thinking, and what makes us fundamentally human, which is connection?
Yeah.
And so those skills will be just as important as the capacity to engage and to code.
If you imagine the AI landscape in, let's say, 2030, I know it's far ahead, but it could be 2 years, whatever. What does good look like from your perspective? So whether it's for citizens, companies, or the planet, what's good?
So good looks like a world where we have shared definitions and practices of what responsibility looks like in practice. We have a shared and global governance approach to mitigating risks of AI, but also making sure that we're accelerating its adoption through pro-innovation policies that's proactively shaped by innovators, by governments, by academics, and by scientists, and where we have a future that is, because of the democratized access to this technology, it is co-created by everyone, for everyone, with everyone, and that this future is both tech-enabled and stays human-centered.
My last question is probably for all the leaders listening now, whether they feel both maybe excited and a bit overwhelmed with all the pace of the change. What is one mindset shift that maybe as a next practical step advice you would like to give them and for them to take away from this conversation into the good future AI landscape you just spoke about?
I'll double click on this question of the cultural mind shift and the cultural moment that we're in beyond the technological one. I think one of the most critical mindset shifts is to adopt a culture of why, a culture of asking the hard questions that understands that this is a moment where we can use this technology to address problems if we work backwards from the problem and not the technology. What are the problems that we would like to address? And how does this technology, whether it be agentic AI, advanced data analytics, or machine learning, how does that technology allow us to come together across sectors and across countries to address those challenges in a way that brings out the best in the technology, but also in the best of us in humans? And I would close by saying that at the end of the day, it is people creating this technology. Yeah. And so we need to invest in people because good data needs good AI needs good data. Yeah. But fundamentally good work needs good people.
Yeah.
And so it starts and ends with the cultural transformation of the people in your teams, of the people in your community, and of the people in your country. And so really investing in cultivating this digital literacy and education and shared vision of what this tech-enabled and human-centered future could look like is one of the biggest challenges and also biggest opportunities of our time.
Thank you, Sasha, for diving with us into the topic around public policy for AI. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the conversation.